What's up everyone, the Game 2K2 here once again. Back in February I did my top 10 underrated films, and now I feel it's time to take a look at the films that I feel are given more credit than they deserve. Not that any of them are bad movies, in fact almost all of the movies on this list I actually kind of like. But I don't think they're as good as so many people make them out to be. Now, before I begin, let me just remind everyone once again, these are my choices, so don't go nuts if you don't agree with me. Well, let's not waste any more time, let's begin. Number 10. Star Wars Episode 3: The Revenge of the Sith. Again, not a terrible movie, but was it really worth all the praise? I didn't think so. To its credit, it's a hell of a lot better than Episode 2, but it still carried the same amount of flaws. Terrible dialogue, an incoherent plot, horrendous acting, and above all, George Lucas in the director's chair. Let's face it, the only thing that keeps Star Wars Episode 3 afloat is a lot of kick-ass action. With Episode 3, Lucas is going for a big epic finale to the prequel series and tried his best to fill up all the plot holes, but in my opinion he failed on both tasks because he added even more plot holes than ever, especially since it was a prequel to the original trilogy, and the finale always felt like the biggest letdown to me. All the advertisements, trailers, posters, even the damn cover to the DVD led you to believe that Darth Vader in the suit played a huge role in the movie. That wound up not happening. Instead, we got only 3 minutes with that version of the character, and he only has 2 lines. Again, it's not terrible, but definitely is not as good as it's said to be. Number 9. The Dark Knight. I can hear your complaints from here. Again, another movie that I do like, but I don't think it's the phenomenal movie that it's been made out to be since its release. First of all, I love Batman. I love the comics, the cartoons, most of the movies. In fact, I think the only thing I can't sit through is the 60s TV show. I can even sit through Batman and Robin, after a few drinks, but I can still sit through it. With The Dark Knight, it's one of those movies that I really loved the first time I saw it, but once the hype went away and I was able to sit through it a couple of times, I began to notice the movie's issues. One of my biggest complaints when it comes to The Dark Knight is that it's really cluttered with its plot. It was rumored that Christopher Nolan originally did not want to do a sequel, and wanted this to be the end of it. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I wouldn't doubt it because he really tries to accomplish too much. There's too many characters, and the movie's plot goes in way too many directions. To me, the movie becomes hard to follow when Two-Face comes into the picture. I've often said that we should have seen Harvey Dent's face burn, and then the revealing should have been saved for another movie. But when they revealed him and put his character into the movie, it just added on to a plot that was already overflowing. So yeah, they did way too much for one movie. Still a good movie, but too overfilled. Number 8. The Fast and the Furious. This was more praised by moviegoers than critics, which seemed to become more typical in the past decade and a half. However, with The Fast and the Furious, it's more of a muscle movie than a good movie. The acting is horrendous, and the story avoids realism at all cost. However, I would be lying if I said the racing wasn't slightly entertaining. The only problem is that it has to go back to the story once the racing is over. I can deal with bad acting, but the story really is the problem with The Fast and Furious. I don't mind unrealistic stories, but the racing storyline just doesn't work whether it's realistic or not, because you're meant to take it seriously, and that's just tough to do. The story ends up being too cheesy in areas, and the drama that they go for in the movie just doesn't work. A great example of this is Dominic explaining to Brian how racing sets him free. The dialogue is just terrible during that scene and just ruins the whole thing. Don't get me wrong, The Fast and the Furious does remain a guilty pleasure in my movie collection, but nothing more than that, because the movie truly is style over substance. Number 7. Spider-Man 2. Comic book adaptations have grown in size over the past decade and doesn't seem to want to slow down. But does that mean that they're all good movies? No. First of all, I loved the first Spider-Man in 2002. To me, that was a near-perfect comic book adaptation. Sure, some of the campy elements from the comics didn't translate too well to the movie, but it still turned out to be a great movie. To me, Spider-Man 2 did not live up to those standards. Now, there were elements of the story that I did like. I liked the story of Peter being exhausted when juggling his personal life and his life as Spider-Man. I liked the development of Dr. Octopus. However, I didn't like the love story, and I hated the film's climax. The love story always drove me mad. I know Peter is in love with Mary Jane, but he gets a little obsessive in this movie. Then there is the final fight between Dr. Octopus and Spider-Man, which is the most patched together fight scene I have ever seen in my life. In fact, even the music sounds patched together on a few occasions. Then, of course, we have the climax with Mary Jane running from the church to Peter's apartment. A cliche that works in most movies, but not this one. Not a bad movie, just very cluttered in a few areas. Number 6. Toy Story 3. Let me just say this right now, I love Pixar. I think they are undoubtedly the greatest 3D animation studio in the world. Pixar is one of very few studios that I don't think has had a single failure since they hit it big back in 1995 with the first Toy Story. However, we live in an era of sequels, and up until last year, Pixar only had one sequel, and that was Toy Story 2. Now, Pixar is starting to get into the sequel phase, and last year we got Toy Story 3. I loved the first two Toy Story movies, and I was really looking forward to seeing another Toy Story in theaters. But when the movie ended, I was neither impressed or disappointed. However, critics claimed it to be just as good, if not better, than the first two movies, and my thoughts were that it was okay, but nowhere near as good as the first two movies. I love the story with Andy going off to college and the toys trying to be played with again. I like a good amount of the drama, but I felt the movie lacked the comedy that the first two movies had. Toy Story 3 got a little bit too overdramatic at times, and the comedy didn't seem to play as big of a part this time around. I really think that's the element that keeps Toy Story 3 from reaching the standards of the first two films. Number 5. The Matrix Reloaded. I loved the first Matrix. It not only had great effects, but it was also one of the greatest stories ever written in the history of film. The acting stunk, but it didn't keep The Matrix from becoming the success that it was. Of course, like most successful movies, movie studios have to ruin the fun by creating a sequel. My initial thought was that it wouldn't be that bad because the Wachowski brothers returned to handle it. I went to theaters to see the movie, and most people walked out of the theater saying it was the greatest movie of all time because of the action, but didn't really comment on anything else. The action is intense in Reloaded, but there really isn't anything else to brag about. Reloaded and the upcoming Revolutions would take the story from the first movie and turn it into a confusing mess. Action can only take a movie so far. The first Matrix did a great job blending the story and the action, while Reloaded does it very poorly, so poorly that you'll wind up losing track of the story halfway through the movie. Also, some of the additional storylines and characters made no sense. The Keymaker, the Architect, and Myro Vinnigan, the Frankish guy. So yeah, action-packed but confusing as hell. Number 4. I Am Legend. If there is one word I can use to describe this movie, it's potential. There was so much potential with I Am Legend. It had a great concept and a great lead actor to really push the movie, because if I had to say anything about Will Smith over the last 10 years, it's that his acting has not only improved, but I think he is slowly becoming one of the greatest actors ever today. The acting is there, but the story is not. One of the most common complaints about the film is its effects, but I don't think that's the problem. What bothers me is that they went for a storyline that wasn't detailed enough to make sense. Apparently some cancer cure they tried backfired and killed almost all of humanity, and those who survived turned into monsters. Okay, that's all well and good, but how the hell did it spread? How did it go airborne? And how did they destroy the Brooklyn Bridge? And not only destroy it, how the hell did they melt it like cheese? They show the results of what happened, but they don't explain enough on how it happened. Again, a great concept with so much potential to be one of the greatest movies of all time, but it just didn't have enough. Number 3. The Green Mile. When it comes to good movies, Tom Hanks rarely misses. He is a tremendous actor that can even bring the most outrageous script to life. The Green Mile was right after another box office smash and critical success, Saving Private Ryan, so there was a lot of anticipation for The Green Mile. I love Saving Private Ryan for its realism and attention to detail when it came to World War II. The Green Mile tries to blend the realism of a 1935 correctional facility with kind of a fantasy twist to it. I always felt that the movie should have stuck to the realism and eliminated the fantasy element with Michael Clarke Duncan's character. I liked the fact that he was really an innocent man, but the whole healing powers element I always thought kind of marred the story. I'm sorry, I know a lot of people liked it, but I thought it was just a really cheesy plot twist on what seemed like an interesting story without it. That's really all I can say about The Green Mile. To me, all it is a movie that I felt could have done without that particular plot. Number 2. Titanic. At the time, there was no movie more expensive or more anticipated than Titanic. Running on a budget of $200 million, James Cameron was looking to create the first loyal depiction of the story of Titanic, going so far that he recreated the entire exterior of the ship, and with state-of-the-art special effects was able to recreate the sinking of the ship as well. So much money and so much time in production, and what do we get? The love story from hell. In order to put some sort of plot into the movie, instead of just telling the story of Titanic, he added a love story between two fictional characters named Jack and Rose. Two people from very different lifestyles who fall in love. I don't mind the idea of adding fictional characters to the story. Hell, I don't even mind a love story. But in all honesty, this is one of the most cliché love stories I have ever seen in film. And yes, it's just as bad as Anakin and Padme from Star Wars. The romance is cheesy, and they add comedy to their story at the most inappropriate moments. My patience ran out with this love story when they added comedy with Rose trying to save Jack when he's handcuffed to one of the pipes. The whole comedy bit with the axe drove me nuts. If they had just toned it down a little bit, then I might have been able to accept it. But they don't. In fact, the love story almost seems to outweigh the story of Titanic, which is what the damn movie is called! Oh, and by the way, despite how I feel about the love story, I do love Gloria Stewart as older Rose. She deserved that Oscar, and I will forever be pissed that she didn't get it. And number 1, Avatar. Wow, another James Cameron film. Weird coincidence. Don't get me wrong, I love most of James Cameron's work. I loved Terminators 1 and 2 growing up, and I definitely loved Aliens as well. After a good while out of the big-budget movie world, James Cameron returned with another big-budget movie called Avatar. And when I say big budget, I mean it because Avatar cost over $300 million to make, easily becoming the most expensive movie ever made, and that's not counting advertisement costs. Avatar would also become the first film in a long time to be in 3D in regular theaters, and not just IMAX theaters. This meant the movie would cost $14 or more a ticket. And was the movie worth that amount of money? And the answer to that is absolutely, positively, no. For some reason, for a movie that cost so much and was gaining so much hype, I was expecting so much more out of it. The plot is a bit overfilled, and the acting really isn't that great. As far as the effects go, I liked them for everything except the actual avatars. The avatars looked a bit too cartoonish, which didn't make them seem believable enough. To me, the only reason why this movie made as much money as it did was because of the 3D. People always love to bring that up more than the actual plot of the movie. The 3D is cool, but once you get past that little bit of excitement, you instantly learn that the movie tries a little too hard with both the story and its action. So that's my top 10 overrated films. Again, I don't really find any of the movies on this list to be terrible. I just don't think they're the picture-perfect movies that most moviegoers and critics make them out to be. Well, everyone, that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.